So next up, podcast listeners, we have an incredibly interesting story. And this ties into today's subject of how to debate the left. And the story starts out with assisted suicide in Canada. Now, a lot of people have, and by the way, a lot of people on my side of the aisle believe assisted suicide is a good thing. Okay? I do not. I'm completely and utterly against assisted suicide. And I think that when we talk about this subject in more detail and we use examples around the world of countries that have assisted suicide programs in place, you will know nothing is good about this program. It ultimately and always goes wrong. So in Canada, Scheduled to Die, the rise of Canada's assisted suicide program. What do you do when you discover your son has made an appointment for his death? On September 7th, Margaret Marcilla called Joshua Tepper, the doctor, who planned to kill her son. Marcilla is 46 years old. That's the mom. And she lives outside Toronto with her husband and daughter, who's a nursing student. Marcella had known that her 23-year-old son, Keanu Vifayan, was depressed. He was diabetic, and he had lost his vision in one eye. And he didn't have a job or a girlfriend or much of a future. And Marcella asked her daughter to log on to Keanu's account. Keanu had given his sister access so she could help him with his email. He never shared anything with his mother. What he was thinking, where he was going, and Marcella was scared about that, which is why she wanted her daughter to check his email. That was when Marcella learned that Keanu had applied for, and in late July had been approved for medical assistance in dying, aka assisted suicide in Canada. His death was scheduled for September 22nd. In a September 7th email from Tepper, the doctor to Keanu, and Tekla Hendrickson, the executive director of the society organization that's responsible for assisted suicide, it's a Toronto facility where Keanu's death would have taken place. Tepper mapped out the schedule. Hi, he emailed. I am confirming the following timing. Please arrive at 8:30 a.m. I will ask for the nurse at 8:45, and I will start the procedure around 9. Procedure will be completed in a few minutes after it starts. Yuck. The procedure entailed administering 2 drugs. First, a coma-inducing agent, then a neuromuscular blocker that would stop Keanu's breathing. He would be dead in 5 to 10 minutes. Apparently, Keanu wanted to bring a dog with him. In an email to him that same day, Hendrickson said, dogs are welcome in the space as long as there is someone there who will be responsible for the dog during the time of the assisted suicide. Marcilla, his mom, was terrified. She tried to do everything for her son, but it had been rough for him. She and his dad had gotten divorced when Keanu was still a kid. On his 16th birthday, she had given him a BMW. When he was 17, he had been in a bad car accident. He wasn't up to college. He smoked a ton of weed. He'd lived with his dad, then his mom, and now with his sister, and then his aunt. Wherever he went, whatever he did, he was unhappy. Going blind in his left eye this past April was his tipping point. And so, ladies and gentlemen, podcast listeners, the article goes on in great detail. And the bottom line is, this is a perfectly healthy 23-year-old male in Canada where perfectly healthy, where the organization in Canada, which was legalized in Canada, and the doctor said it was okay for this guy to essentially be killed. Because clearly that's what this is. All right? A perfectly healthy man who's 23 years old, going through a rough time, decides, I just want to die and I'm not going to tell anybody about it. It's just between me and my doctor and, Canada, of course. did they intend to do this? Did they intend for 23-year-olds to be able to kill themselves or to be killed? And this assisted suicide thing, this is not the only place on the planet where this is happening or where this can happen. And these are allegedly very modern, contemporary, thoughtful, and enlightened societies. And I can tell you that in the United States of America, there are some states that want to do this or have done this. By this, I mean implemented assisted suicide, I believe. I'm not really sure. Chris, you should look that up. I know in my own state, I'll speak to that. In my own state, the bill never passed, but they kept bringing it up, and it was a very emotional subject. Some Republicans supported it because they saw a parent get really ill and suffer and so forth. But this is what goes wrong when you pass these bills. Okay? This is exactly what goes wrong. And so the doctor, apparently in this particular case, was confronted by the mom, and the doctor, of course, was exposed as being this idiot who, of course, thought it was okay to put to death a 23-year-old who was perfectly healthy. So you might say to yourself, ladies and gentlemen, why does this matter? It matters because it is principally the left who wants to engage in assisted suicide. And as you can imagine, once you go down that slippery slope, there is no coming back because you're going to continue to add categories. Well, it was just people who were terminally ill. Well, now it's people who were, not just terminally ill, but aren't feeling too good about themselves. But they have to be over 60. Well, now it's people who are under 40 who, don't feel really good about themselves and they've lost vision in one eye and they're unhappy about their lives. Yeah, we can kill them too. It never ends. It never ends. And this subject is directly connected to the abortion subject, and I will explain to you why that is the case. So, in Georgia, we have this debate between Herschel Walker, who's running for the United States Senate, against Pastor Raphael Warnock. And Pastor Raphael Warnock, both gentlemen, by the way, are black. Not that should matter, because it doesn't. But what does matter is one is a black pastor. That matters because you would think that a pastor, by definition, when he's preaching in church, that he would be an individual who would talk about and espouse life. Namely, you would think he would be pro-life, right? He wouldn't want and wouldn't believe in and would certainly encourage people to have children versus to abort them. And so, as you can imagine, in Georgia, you have the left-wing media. These two gentlemen are in a debate. And Raphael Warnock, the pastor, is actually the guy who is unbridled pro-abortion. And Herschel Walker, the Republican, is pro-life. So watch how this Republican debates, because he brings humanity back into the debate, which I think is important. And since the subject matter of this podcast is how do you debate the left, this, I think, is a great example. It is exemplary of one way of doing so, and that is never run away from what you believe. And it is directly connected to assisted suicide in Canada. So we have a clip from this debate where Raphael Warnock, the sitting United States Senator, the pastor, basically says, well, I don't want the government involved in my decisions. Why should the government be involved in my decisions about whether or not I have an abortion? And I only want the doctor involved. Listen to Herschel Walker's response. We have the clip, and here it is.
Doctor and the U.S. government, we're asking you to take a clear position right now. Do you believe there should be any limitations on abortion set by the government? And you have 60 seconds.
I think that the women of this country and the women of this state woke up one summer morning and a core protection that they've known for 50 years was taken from them by an extremist Supreme Court. And I stand where I've said I stand in the past, that a patient's room is too narrow and small and cramped a space for a woman, her doctor, and the United States government. We are witnessing right now what happens when politicians, most of them men, pile into patients' rooms. You get what you're seeing right now. And the women of Georgia deserves a senator who will stand with them. I trust women more than I trust politicians.
May I respond?
Very quickly, Mr. Walker.
You know, it is, and I heard about him. I heard he's a neat talker, but did he not mention that there's a baby in that room as well? And also, did he not mention that he asking the taxpayer to pay for it? So he's bringing the government back into the room.
So the government's back in the room anyway, because, and that was, of course, initially, that was Warnock talking and responding. And then you had Herschel Walker saying, well, what about, isn't there a baby in the room too? And also, Walker is saying, well, wait a minute. You have Warnock saying that the government shouldn't be involved, but the government is involved because the government is taxing you. And then it's engaging in paying for these things. So the government is very much involved. And so you have this Baptist minister, Warnock, and anyone out there in podcasts knows that if you're a Baptist, you are pro-life, okay, by definition, because that's part of the faith. And Warnock is this phony Baptist minister, complete phony, saying, well, it should be unbridled all the way up to the 9th month. Ladies and gentlemen, this is really the issue, okay? Herschel Walker is saying, well, there actually is another human being in the room. And because we're not willing to talk about that person as an actual human being, we're taking all of the humanity out of this conversation. And I can tell you, I've said this before in my own state, ladies and gentlemen, in the 9th month, my state allows a baby that is perfectly healthy to be aborted in the 9th month in my own state. And always, this is where these conversations and policy actions go. They always go to the extreme because what ends up happening is you have the left who basically doesn't want to define this as a human being, ever. To them, it's not a human being. And as a result, you have abortion stretching all the way to the 9th month, including for healthy, perfectly healthy children. And so, yeah, the government's very much involved in this because it is engaging in this awful behavior, this egregious behavior where you have the complete degradation of humanity because no one wants to say, oh, it's not really a child. And you have Herschel Walker saying, well, there's actually another person in the room. It's the baby. How does this, ladies and gentlemen, connect to assisted suicide in Canada? Because they are both being pushed by government and by those in government, number one. And number two, because you have a slippery slope on both sides. My home state, as I said, you can have an abortion of a perfectly healthy child all the way up to the 9th month. And in Canada, you can be perfectly healthy, just not feeling too good about yourself, and therefore go and have assisted suicide take place and have an individual kill you. Oh, but you gave your permission for him to kill you. Yeah, but it's a doctor. You went to a doctor and the doctor says it's okay. The doctor's like, oh, don't worry about it. Yeah, I'm a doctor. It's part of my job is to kill you. You're perfectly healthy, though, and you're not really feeling great about yourself, but that's my job. Just like with the debate between Herschel Walker and Senator Raphael Warnock, where they're both debating about abortion, but really the issue is we have abortions occurring in parts of this country, certainly not everywhere, but certainly parts of this country where it is so extreme that it's gone to the 9th month for perfectly healthy children. And we have a Democrat Party that's still saying, well, that's really not a human being. And a doctor that's willing to perform the abortion that's saying, oh, that's still not a human being. And in Canada, a doctor that's committing assisted suicide of a perfectly healthy 23-year-old and saying, oh, that's not really a human being anymore. That's how they're connected, ladies and gentlemen. And this is how those of us on the right must never compromise our principles of talking about why all life matters. Because I'm not even bringing in the religious side of this. It's just like common sense. Of course it matters, right? It's science. Of course it's a life, and it does matter. It's the job of doctors, and it's the job of all of us to try to find out ways of extending life. I'm not trying to end it as soon as we can possibly end it.